I rise today to address the issue of the appropriation bills. A budget, Mr Acting Deputy President, reflects the vision for the nation that the government of the day has, and it puts into clear view the values that underpin that vision for the nation. Because frankly, where you put your money tells you where your priorities are. It's the same for a household, it's the same for a government. You put the money there, it shows people what you think is important. The Abbott government has made it very clear that it is steering Australia on a cold-hearted path where the gap between those who have and those who have not grows ever larger. The Abbott government's budget reflects that the vision for this country that our Prime Minister has is a vision of the past. It is a vision of saying, let's leg rope Australia to the 19th and 20th centuries. Let's keep this country as a dig it up, cut it down, ship it away economy. Let's keep on hollowing out manufacturing and losing manufacturing jobs. Let's actually ignore the major overwhelming issue of our time, and that is global warming, and we don't care about what that's doing, particularly in rural and regional Australia, to agriculture, let alone the environment. Ignore all that because essentially we want to protect the vested interests of the people who donate and vote for the Liberal Party. That's essentially what this budget has done. It is about protecting the vested interests of the old order. And it's not new. Machiavelli identified in the 15th century. You know, there's nothing harder to bring about than change, because the vested interests of the old order fight like partisans to keep their vested interests, and those who believe in a new way are lukewarm in their support because people don't actually believe in things until they have actual experience of them. And that's what's going on with this budget. The vested interests of the old order have been itching for a coalition government to get back in so that they can absolutely nail down their wealth and interests. And that's why what this budget is doing is driving Australia towards being a plutocracy, a country in which the wealth and the wealthy and big business own and run the government for their own interest. And that's what's happening here. And what we are seeing is, in order for that to happen, a massive permanent hit on low-income earners, on the unemployed, on the sick, on students, on the future, because the future of the country depends on transitioning out of the things that make the vested interests of the old order rich, that is, transitioning away from a resource-based economy and actually investing in a country that says, in this century, we are going to do everything to protect our ability to survive on this planet, and that means looking after the environment in the face of global warming, doing what we can to slow it down and to adapt to what's already in place, but at the same time saying, well, what sort of society do we want? Because in addressing global warming, you actually get to rethink what sort of society you want. Do you want a society that is more equal? Do you want a society where everyone, regardless of who their parents are, where they live, where they were brought up, get a good education, where everyone has an equal opportunity, where there is no discrimination on the basis of race or on the basis of sexuality or on the basis of gender? Any discrimination should go. we have got an opportunity to rethink everything. And of course that includes the design of our cities, our transportation systems. We have so many opportunities. So this budget is essentially the Abbott government locking in the vested interests of the past and their wealth sources against those who want to transition to a better future that addresses global warming and addresses inequality. Two of the things which the World Economic Forum have identified as being the overwhelming threats to the stability of the planet in this next decade. As the Abbott government moves to dismantle universal health care, defunds access to quality public education, strips away money from Indigenous programs, pushes young people into poverty, saddles students with ever-increasing higher education debt, and forgoes the revenue, billions of dollars in revenue from carbon pricing, that is the big polluters paying for their pollution, which is driving global warming. Instead of that, the Abbott government's ripping up the safety net and the social contract that has been central to safeguarding egalitarianism in this country. We are going backwards on the idea that people in Australia have equal opportunity. And in a budget, you should be trying to fix that, not actually lock it in and drive it harder. Contrary to the stack of budget papers that were released last month, we Greens don't want this country run for corporations. We don't want a country in which you have BHP turning up in the Treasurer's office saying, "Don't you dare touch our fuel tax credits, because we are capable of running exactly the same campaign against you that we ran against Kevin Rudd and destroyed his ability to bring in the super profits tax on the big miners. Don't do it. Don't touch us." And so that's exactly what happened. BHP is not going to be touched. None of the big resource-based industries are touched. In fact, they are going to get their fuel tax rebate just as they want it, and this is one of the things the government can do. Big corporations can avoid tax, and they do, but they can't get out of it if the government determines not to give them back their fossil fuel subsidies and their fuel tax rebate. But no, that hasn't happened. And while on the subject on the fuel indexation, you need, if you're going to put in a price signal, it has to drive transformation. Saying to people, we are going to take money from people who have no options with public transport, who drive old, inefficient cars, we're going to take money from you and we're going to put it into more roads so we can have more congestion, so we can have more urban sprawl, so we can have less sustainable cities, makes no sense. And it is quite extraordinary that the Greens have pushed for years for mandatory vehicle fuel efficiency standards, and we still do. And yet in the last period of government, the Labor Party would not move on mandatory vehicle fuel efficiency standards, neither would the Coalition. And why? Because the cars we were building in Australia wouldn't have met standards like that. We were allowing the transport fleet in Australia to go backwards, whereas in other countries they are moving on fuel efficiency standards. And when President Obama talks about fuel efficiency on the G20 agenda, he's talking about mandatory vehicle fuel efficiency standards, and good on him. And we intend to be pushing that here, because the best way of transforming things is, of course, getting more efficient vehicle fleet and getting more public transport so that people have the option of driving less, and when they do drive, of driving more efficiently. But, Mr Deputy President, we have got a scenario where the Abbott government tried to confect a budget emergency, and explain to me someone how you can say there's a budget emergency when at the same time you say we are not going to fix the mining tax, we want the big miners to not pay any of this extra profit that they're making, and at the same time we don't want the polluters to pay. In fact, we're going to raise a couple of $2 billion out of your pocket to give to the big polluters. That's what supposed direct action actually does. And we are having people ring our offices constantly, telling us about the hardship that they are experiencing because of this budget. We're having people ring us and tell us every day that they can't afford it. We've had students write to us saying that they simply will not be able to go to university because living rurally, it's already a challenge to get to uni and be able to meet the accommodation and extra costs, and now this will make it nearly impossible. So we will send these budget measures back, Mr Acting Deputy President. We will be voting against what the Abbott government wants to do. We will send back all of their harsh cuts in every shape or form that we can. But the issue here, there are some who have suggested, some such as Andrew Wilkie and the Palmer United Party, that the Senate should block supply, should stop the ordinary annual services of government being delivered, which would mean that they would grind to a halt in a progressive way from the 1st of July. That includes 150,000 federal public servants not being paid. And these are the public servants who not only would suffer personally, but they are the ones that make sure government services like Medicare payments or Social Security pension or welfare payments are paid to people who need them. So if you decide that you're going to stop the ordinary annual services of government, you are going to shut down those offices and people are not going to be able to access those services. The rejecting or delaying appropriation bills means that without those annual appropriations, there's no source of funding for delivering the wide range of services that government agencies deliver. And whilst the funds might be there to pay the pension or to pay tax refunds and a whole other range of government payments, there are no funds lawfully available to pay for the administration of those payments, whether they are through direct salary or systems administration costs or to contractors. And so what you would be effectively doing if Andrew Wilkie and Clive Palmer have their way, you would have a range of vital services that government delivers, everything from air services and other transport safety services, quarantine protections, customs and border operations, law enforcement and regulatory services, the administration of the federal courts and tribunals, a multiplicity of research activities and the conduct of international relations, all could be compromised by the unavailability of funds to be able to have people deliver them. And while it's expected that essential services would be maintained and employees would continue to work for deferred salary, the impact on the economy and the financial system through the failure of the government to pay its bills and honour its contracts cannot be underestimated. And that impact would be exacerbated by the inability of individual Commonwealth employees to pay their bills or buy goods and services. I mean, so many, if you're realistic about this, people live from pay to pay. They have to pay a mortgage. What is a Commonwealth public servant going to do if they don't get paid? Are they going to default on their mortgage? How are they going to pay their rates? How are they going to pay their energy bills? How are they going to go and buy food? These are the realities. But there is no doubt that we are going to take it absolutely up to the Abbott government on this budget. We have already given a clear indication we are going to do everything in our power to keep the clean energy package, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, and in supporting the retention of that, we've set up a double dissolution trigger, and if the government wants to go to an election, it can. Blocking appropriation bills means they have the choice of just going to a House of Reps election. A double dissolution trigger means you can secure a re-election for the whole parliament. And we've already set up one trigger, and it's up to the Abbott government. And of course, as soon as we set up the trigger, we had the government say, oh, just because we've got a trigger, we wouldn't pull it. And that is because the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, knows the community finds this budget totally abhorrent. Totally abhorrent. But it's interesting, Mr Deputy President, it is always the far-right wingers who are the ones who create instability and uncertainty in the community. And if you look at what the Tea Party did in the United States, bringing that country almost to the brink in terms of the financial relationship there, you can see what happens if you start threatening ordinary annual services of government. And of course, in Australia, it was the Liberal Party who forced the constitutional crisis in 1975. They only threatened to block a budget. They didn't actually do it. They threatened to do it, that brought on that major constitutional crisis. And the Greens are here as very strong and reliable people in this parliament. We have demonstrated through balance of power in state governments around the country and in this parliament that we will absolutely take it up to the government. We are going to vote down every one of their cruel budget measures that come through this place. But we are not going to cause a constitutional crisis. We will, however, set up a double dissolution trigger and have that potential to go to an election, and if the government is prepared to go to an election, good, because the people will show them very well that they do not support the unfair and regressive measures that the government's proposing. So just to reiterate, the Greens will block and vote against the attacks on universal health care and vote down the $7 GP co-payment. We'll block the cruel changes to the living and studying allowance for young people and students. We will vote against and block the unfair and regressive user pays model proposed for our universities. And we will do everything we can to stop the destruction of the clean energy package, which is, again, it's this issue of do you want the past or do you want the future? We are very much focused on the future of our nation, of looking after people, of creating jobs, of attracting investment in renewable energy and new jobs, in spending money on research and universities, in developing the knowledge-based economy, in supporting the creative industries. That's where we want to go. And we absolutely condemn the government's attack on science, research and evidence-based policy. We do not support in any shape or form the crippling cuts to CSIRO, the Bureau of Meteorology, and rolling together National Environmental Research Program and the Australian Climate Change Science Program. We can't continue to produce world-class research if the government keeps threatening the research budget every year. It is the wrong way to be going in Australia. And certainly in terms of Tasmania, we now have a world-class hub of marine, climate and Antarctic researchers, and we should be strengthening that. And instead of that, the government is smashing it with cuts to CSIRO, and we're going to see a further 18 jobs go, making a total of 67 in the last year. We are strong supporters of CSIRO, and we are not going to support those savage attacks, nor do we support the attacks on the ABC and SBS. And the next round, we're told that the $45 million is just the start and there'll be another $45 million out of the ABC and SBS. Well, Australians love the ABC and SBS and do not want to support these cuts, but it shows the values. It shows the Rupert Murdoch agenda coming out of the government. It shows what the Institute of Public Affairs wants to do to shut down and cut down the public broadcaster and SBS, and we all know why that is the case. And of course the Australia network is something that Rupert Murdoch has long wanted to shut down. The Greens do want the big miners, the bankers and polluters to pay their fair share first, and we could raise $79.2 billion in revenue and avoid all these cruel measures in the budget if we actually did get the super profits tax on the miners fixed, if we got a tax avoidance from these discretionary trusts dealt with, if we retained the carbon price, if we actually dealt with this issue of past and future, if we actually put a levy on the 4 big banks, if we imposed a levy on thermal coal. We need to actually make decisions that set us up for the future, not leg rope us to the past. And I reiterate, the Greens in this budget will stand absolutely up to the Abbott government's attempt to lock us into the wealth and the resource-based economy dictating
Order.
unfairness.
Your time has expired.